Yes, welcome back to Pursuing God's Heart Yourself. We're in the book of Psalms. We're working our way through 7 principles that will be helpful for you as you feed yourself from God's Word. That's the goal, not to need these videos, but instead to be motivated and moved by these videos to get into the book of Psalms. And so I'd encourage you to do that. And also join us for Cor Deo Online. There'll be more and more resources coming out over these next few weeks related to the book of Psalms. So we're thinking about a principle, one of the 7 that is useful for us, and that is to recognize the type of text that you're dealing with. Wherever you are in the Bible, have an awareness of what kind of writing it is, because if it's poetry, it's going to function differently than if it's narrative or again, if it's a speech or a letter or something else. So in this case, in the book of Psalms, we've got poetry. Not poetry the way we think of it in the English-speaking world with rhyme and rhythm and meter and all that kind of stuff, but Hebrew poetry. And Hebrew poetry is really, it's quite intricate, it's beautifully done, but the thing is that we're just not used to it. And so I want to flag for us 2 things to look for when you're dealing with biblical poetry. You're dealing with it in Psalms, but you'll also find it in all the wisdom books, a lot of the prophets. It's a quite common form of writing. Basically, what we want to be looking for are parallelisms, I'll explain that in a second, and imagery. So what's a parallelism? A parallelism is where you have a statement that's made, and then after, say, a comma, another line that in some way develops that statement. It might reinforce it, it might kind of restate it, it might contrast with it, it might develop it, but in some way the second line is tied to the first, and we've got to make sure that we don't separate them as if the book of Psalms is filled with random pairs of slightly different things. Let me show you what I mean in Psalm 6. We've got that little kind of musical information at the top. Psalm of David. Look at verse 1. O Lord, rebuke me not in your anger, nor discipline me in your wrath. He's not saying 2 distinct things here. He's saying something in using these 2 lines. O Lord, rebuke me not in your anger, nor discipline me in your wrath. And so this kind of final bit here, the in your anger and the in your wrath, is kind of saying the same thing. We can feel that, right? Anger, wrath, very much similar language. And also here, rebuke and discipline. He's kind of coming to God and he's saying, Lord, I'm suffering, I'm being chastened for some sin, maybe for some issue in my life, and I'm recognizing that you're the one that is bringing that discipline, that chastening, and I'm asking you to stop. Okay, I'm asking that it can finish. Rebuke me not, nor discipline me. Okay, it's the same thing. It's not that he's got 2 concerns, God's rebuke and God's discipline, as if those are 2 separate things. It's all referring to the same thing. Then you come to verse 2. And verse 2 is a classic parallel statement. We've got 2 lines with the same structure in both. Be gracious to me. Second line, heal me. O Lord, for, there's the kind of explanation word, kind of because, why I am languishing, or my bones are troubled. And so the languishing and the bones being troubled is 2 ways of referring to the same thing. By taking the second line and working like this, it creates space for us to ponder, to think, for the images to form more fully in our hearts as we're reading it. Then sometimes you'll get the first line developed or new direction, if you like, that's the wrong word, but contrasted in the second. So my soul also is greatly troubled. However, but, notice the contrast here. But you, O Lord, how long? I'm struggling, I'm suffering. How long, Lord? How long? As I look to you, as I turn from my situation to you, the question is how long? And so as you go through the Psalms, you'll find that you can do this almost at will. Just spot the pairs of lines. Sometimes you'll have 3 lines. Sometimes the 3 lines are perhaps just that they don't fit on two, but sometimes they're genuinely three lines. Look at verse 6. I am weary with my moaning. Every night I flood my bed with tears. That is, I drench my couch with my weeping. And so this is kind of following on from that, but that's feeding into it. So you've got kind of a three-line parallelism. It breaks the rhythm, and there are reasons for that. But the other thing we want to notice, as well as the how the lines of text relate to each other, is to recognize that there are images that are being presented, sometimes over the course of several sets of lines. It's like the movie is projecting. It's more of an artistic presentation than a movie, maybe a sort of a video that goes with a song or something. So we've got these images that are coming through. So for example here, verses 4 and 5, turn, O Lord, deliver my life, save me for the sake of your steadfast love, for in death there is no remembrance of you, in Sheol who will give you praise? This is really strong language here, isn't it? He's saying, Lord, deliver me, save me for the sake of your steadfast love, because if I die, he's really feeling the pressure. This chastening is kind of unto death, it feels like. If I die, if I go to the place of the dead, that's what Sheol is, in death, in the grave, in being buried, it's very quiet there. Right? It's that's the kind of concept he's saying. Who's going to be crying out praise to you at the place of the dead? And so it's quite a vivid image. Then he talks in verses 6 and 7, again, strong imagery. Just, I'm wept out. I've cried my eyes out. It's kind of an English way of saying, right? I flood my bed with tears. I drench my couch with weeping. My eye wastes away. It's like I'm crying so much, my very eyes themselves are just wasting away, growing weak. I can barely open my eyes. I'm just drained. Maybe you've cried like that. That kind of gut-wrenching, it's not going to stop kind of agony, kind of grief that he's describing. And so we want to be sensitive to the pairs of lines. We also want to be sensitive to the imagery that's developing in the way the psalm is written. And so as we come to the end of Psalm 6, he's telling others, the people who are against him, to depart. The Lord has heard the sound of my weeping. The Lord has heard my plea. The Lord accepts my prayer. Notice this repetition here. Heard the sound, heard my plea, accepts my prayer. All my enemies shall be ashamed and greatly troubled. They shall turn back and be put to shame in a moment. So there comes the confidence at the end of the psalm. After the chastening, after the crying out to God, the weeping, the praying, he's able to say, you know what? God does hear my prayer. God does answer. And in tough times, whether God is chastening us specifically for some sin in our lives or not, it's a good psalm to remind us that even when we just cry and cry and cry to God, ultimately we can have that kind of quiet confidence that he does hear. He does accept what we say to him, and those who oppose us ultimately don't get to write the end of the story. He does. And so there's Psalm 6, just an example, but we could go to any psalm and we would find parallelism and we would find imagery. And as we spend some time recognizing how these thoughts are developing, recognizing the images that are kind of being projected into our hearts, then the response of our hearts can hopefully be what God would want from us as we spend time feasting on his word.